All right, guys, welcome back again. We're picking up right where we left off in the last video. So, if you haven't watched the last video yet, you need to go back and watch that before you watch this because we have already analyzed our play to honor, and now we're ready to move on to the multiple choice questions and the writing prompt that goes with it. So, before I get down to that, I'm going to rewrite the title of my lesson up at the top of the page again just so I can refresh myself on what I'm doing. So I know this lesson is analyzing rhyme and repetition. Okay. So I know analyzing means that I'm going to break something apart. It's going to get broken down so I can take a closer look at it. And I know rhyme deals with my end sounds. And I know for this lesson, I'm dealing with a few types of repetition. I'm dealing with word repetition, and I'm dealing with alliteration, and I'm also thinking about assonance. Okay, and I know anytime I'm considering those, I need to also think about the tone of the text and whether or not it's positive, negative, or neutral. And sometimes I also have to think about word choice, whether or not the word choice the author uses is strong or weak. And then I need to also think about the author's meaning. All right, so and we're going to consider how all of those things work together so I have unity in the text. All right, so let's look at our directions. They tell me to use the hints on this page to help us answer the questions. So I know I have a hint for each question, including the writing prompt. So let's look at our first hint and then we'll look at number one. So the hint says, how does this poet create a sense of unity in the Barbara Frecci poem? So if you remember in our play to honor, there was a section in paragraph 6 that had to do with lines from the poem, about Barbara Frecci, the woman who hung the Union flag, even though the Southern soldiers told her to take it down. So that poem had alliteration and it had rhyme in it, right? So we know that those things work together to create unity. So, how does the poet create a sense of unity in the Barbara Frecci poem? Well, we know that they use rhyme and alliteration, and those things help us create unity. Okay. So we know that we are looking for some examples of maybe rhyme, alliteration, and we're thinking about how that creates unity, right? Because we know rhyme connects ideas in certain lines of poetry, and we know it helps give the poem like a musical quality, it helps it flow, and we know that alliteration helps with the rhythm and it helps also connect ideas with words. So let's look at number one and see what the question asks. It says, which of the following describes the effect of a sound device that the poet uses in the Barbara Frecci poem, which is in paragraph 6. So we know that we're still thinking about this poem in paragraph 6, and we're thinking about sound devices. So we've got to look for a good example of a sound device and how it affects um what's going on in the poem. So I want you to take a minute. I want you to answer this multiple choice question on your own. And then, whenever you have this answered, you can come back and you can check your answer with mine, and we'll talk about why it's right and why it's wrong. All right, so go ahead, pause the video, answer your question. Okay, so I am assuming that you are back and you are ready to go over number one. So, one more time, which of the following describes the effect of a sound device that the poet uses in the Barbara Frecci poem in paragraph 6? So, let's look at answer choice A. Answer choice A says the repetition of the sound at the end of bravest and the beginning of town stresses the importance of these words. So, we know we're looking at the repetition of sound here. And it's telling us the end of the word bravest, so that S sound, and the beginning of the word town, so t, stresses the importance of the words. Well, let's look at this. We know repetition is something that's the same. It's getting repeated. Repetition means something the same is getting repeated over and over again. So, that brave est sound is a little bit different than the sound that's at the beginning of town. They both have the t, but we know we're looking at the est sound at the end of bravery. So this is really an incorrect use of repetition. Um, so this one is not going to be the best answer choice for us. So this is incorrect repetition. So that means answer choice A can be eliminated. Let's look at answer choice B. So the rhyming words at the end of each pair of lines tie the lines together and cause the lines to flow in a musical way. So we know the Barbara Frecci poem does have rhyme. Let's look back up at it. We marked it here. So we know that the first line and the second line rhyme, and then the third and the fourth line rhyme. We did that when we found the rhyme scheme. So we know that there are rhyming words, so that is true. And they are at the end of each pair of lines, and they tie the lines together and cause the lines to flow in a musical way. So if we know anything about rhyme, we know that rhyme creates a musical quality. That is true. And whenever you read this, that rhyme at the end does kind of make it sound musical. So that is true. So I would say answer choice B is a potentially good answer choice, but we need to see what answer choice C and D say first. So C says the repetition of the word up in the first and fourth lines show that Barbara Frecci's bravery made the town look up to her. Well, we know that it does use the word up in the first and the fourth lines, but does the poem ever say that her town actually looks up to her? It never really says anything about that. It says, up rose Barbara Frecci then, bowed with her fourscore years and 10, bravest of all. In Fredericktown, she took up the flag and the men hauled down. So, it's not really mentioning how her town feels about her. So, I would say answer choice C is kind of incorrect too. It's definitely not the best answer. Answer choice B is better than C, because answer choice C, we don't really know how her town feels about her. So now let's look at answer choice D. The similar sounds in the words Frecci and flag call attention to the connection between Barbara Frecci and her heroic deed. So, we know Frecci and flag both begin with F, right? However, the emphasis is not really on the original F sound in those words. It's a little bit different, instead of being similar sounds. So I'm going to say because of this, answer choice D is not the best option for us either. Out of all of the answer options for number one, answer choice B is the best because it's the only one that talks about rhyme and how rhyme is used in a musical way. We know that anytime something is dealing with rhyme, it's going to give it a flow and a musical quality. That's what it's there for. It's also there to connect ideas, right? So it's tying the lines together. This goes along with everything that we know about about rhyme. It puts it all there for us. So this is the best option. So let's move on down to number 2. The hint for number 2 says, what phrase does Jerome repeat several times? So if you go back and look at the end of our play, um, from the poem in paragraph 6 to the end, there is one phrase that Jerome repeats 3 times. He repeats it once in paragraph 7, twice in paragraph 9, and that is the phrase bravest of all. So he's repeating that phrase over and over again. Okay, so now let's look at our question. Number 2 says, which phrase is used to highlight Jerome's gradual change in attitude? So we know that Jerome does have a change in attitude because at the beginning of the play, he is kind of unconvinced about poetry. He said poems are only about flowers and fluff. He doesn't think they can be about stuff that's serious, such as bravery, war, people doing courageous deeds. So whenever Alicia reads the poem, he starts to get he starts to have a little change in attitude and he repeats a certain phrase that lets us know that he is having this change in attitude. So I want you to think about the phrase that we talked about, how Jerome repeats. I want you to look at your answer choices and see which one you think is the best option. This one should be pretty easy. It's a pretty much a dead giveaway. So see what you can come up with and come back and check your answer. Okay, guys, so I'm assuming you're back. You're ready to go over number 2, which was which phrase is used to highlight Jerome's gradual change in attitude. So we already talked about his change in attitude. So now we are going to talk about which phrase shows us that he has a change in attitude. So let's look at answer choice A. It says chariots, cheering crowds, tons of trumpets. So this is repeated, well, this phrase is used in paragraph 3. Jerome does say this. These are examples of alliteration. So chariots, cheering, tons, trumpet. This is one of the examples we pointed out for alliteration. So this does not really show a change in attitude in Jerome. He's just talking about how people are honoring heroes like they did in Roman times. So this does not change. It's not showing us that his attitude is changing. So there's no change in Jerome whenever he repeats this line in the poem. So answer choice B says flowers and fluff. So this was kind of his attitude before, right? So we know that flowers and fluff, he says this because he doesn't think poems are all that. He doesn't think they could be about serious stuff. So this is his original attitude, not his change. Okay. Answer choice C says bravest of all. Well, we know that Jerome repeats this phrase a bunch. The hint told us that. So he repeats this phrase a bunch. Whenever he hears Alicia say it, whenever he reads it in the poem, he starts to think, bravest of all. That's kind of neat, you know? And then he's thinking about how that phrase bravest of all, it's a poem about soldiers. And then he's thinking, oh, there's got to be other poems about bravery and courage that we can find. So, bravest of all is definitely a good answer option, but let's look at C. Let's look at answer choice D next, so that we can accurately figure out which one's the best. So, answer choice D says poems about soldiers. Well, we know that he is talking about poems about soldiers, but this one is after his attitude has already changed. It's not the gradual change because this phrase comes after he has already changed his mind about poetry. So, the only option here is answer choice C, and I said it should be a dead giveaway because the hint asked us to find this phrase. So, number 2 should have been pretty easy. Hopefully, you got it right. All right, so now let's move on down to the writing portion. Yay, fun times. So, we have to look at the hint first to think about a few things. So, the hint says what happened before, during, and after each student says the phrase bravest of all. So, we're still dealing with this phrase bravest of all. So I want to take this a step further. And I want us to just kind of think about how the students kind of build their ideas on top of each other after they use that phrase, bravest of all. Okay, so we're thinking about how they use that phrase, bravest of all, to kind of build on ideas from each other. So let's talk about Alicia first. So, Alicia mentions that phrase, bravest of all, when she reads the Barbara Frecci poem about the woman who refused to put down her Union flag. So she is the one who kind of brings up the phrase. So she suggests and reads the poem about Barbara Frecci. And we know that the phrase bravest of all is used in that Barbara Frecci poem. So Alicia is the one who brings up the phrase when she reads the section of the poem to Jerome and Tia. So now let's talk about Jerome. We know Jerome repeats that phrase over and over again several times. It's like he's kind of thinking out loud about the idea and how poems look a little bit differently than what he originally thought. So he repeats the phrase, and his attitude starts to change. He even suggests that they could find more poems, right? So he is opening up his mind to the idea of other poems. So now let's talk about Tia. So in paragraph 10, the last paragraph of our play, Tia says, "That's it, Jerome. We'll put together a slideshow using poems about bravery and music too." So she said, "Jerome, you're a genius." So she makes the suggestion that they should make a slideshow using poems about bravery. So that phrase, bravest of all, kind of helps stem all of these ideas. So Alicia mentioned the phrase, Jerome repeats the phrase and starts thinking about other poems, and then Tia gets in the idea from Jerome that they should make a slideshow about um, bravery using poems and music. All right, so now that we have thought about how each student kind of uses that phrase, bravest of all, to build on each other's ideas, let's go ahead and look at our writing prompt. So it says, read the statement below, then answer the question that follows. So here's the statement. So it says, the author repeats the phrase bravest of all to emphasize how the students build on each other's ideas as they plan their presentation. So that's your statement. And now you have to write a paragraph explaining how you can tell that the above statement is true. So we're proving it. And we have to use at least two details from the passage to support your response. So let's look at our phrase. Let's look at our statement one more time. So the author repeats the phrase bravest of all. So we know we are using that phrase bravest of all, which is an example of repetition, to emphasize how the students build on each other's ideas as they plan their presentation. So, in a paragraph, we are going to explain how that statement is true. So, it's like we have to prove it. And we're going to prove it using at least two details from the passage to support our response. So, at least two details. Oh, there we go. So we're going to pick two details from the passage that kind of support our response. Okay, so since we're thinking about this writing prompt, whenever we are writing, I want you to use your racist strategy. So we know our racist strategy asks us to restate the prompt, answer the question, cite our evidence, explain our evidence, and then provide like a little short statement of summary at the end of our paragraph. So let's talk about this restating the prompt for just a second. We know that we kind of already have some sort of restatement, which is the statement that they give us. That is almost a complete restatement of the prompt. However, it's missing a few things. We know that when we restate the prompt, we don't need to necessarily just call them the author. We need to actually put the author's name. And the author of this play to honor is Jana Taylor. So that already sounds a little bit better. You would say Janet Taylor repeats the phrase bravest of all to emphasize how the students build on each other's ideas as they plan their presentation. So, next, we're going to take it even a step further and we're going to add the title of the text in your restatement. So, you would begin it by saying, in to honor, comma, Jana Taylor repeats the phrase bravest of all to emphasize how the students build on each other's ideas as they plan their presentation. So I'm going to pause my video and I'm going to fill that in. Give me 1 second, guys. Okay, so we have our complete restatement of the prompt, which would be in to honor, Janet Taylor repeats the phrase bravest of all to emphasize how the students build on each other's ideas as they plan their presentation. So your restatement is complete. So now all that's left is for you to answer the question, which is proving that it's true by citing your evidence and explaining how the evidence proves that that statement is true. So, you're going to have to find your two examples from the passage that can support the fact that we know this statement is true, that she uses the phrase bravest of all to emphasize how the students build on each other's ideas as they plan their presentation. So, you're going to have to tell me what phrases she includes, how does she prove that it's true that they're building on their ideas? So you can use your hint that we did together to help you find your evidence. You just need to go pick out certain things from the passage because we were brainstorming. So you need to get a little more specific. So I'm going to turn you loose. I'm going to give you the chance to write your paragraph. And don't forget, I want you to use your racist strategy. And I want you to make sure you have your two details from the passage. So we've already restated the prompt, so that's taken care of. So go ahead and prove to me that this statement is true using two details from the passage and make sure you explain your answer pretty thoroughly. When you come back, we will talk about the correct answer and why, or a version of the correct answer, the answer that I came up with. And then we will kind of break it down a little bit further. So go ahead, pause your video, and go ahead and start writing. I'm looking forward to see what you come up with, guys. All right, guys, so I'm assuming you are back because you have written your paragraph and now you're ready to talk about it. So let me show you my answer, my paragraph. So, we know that the prompt was telling us to write a paragraph explaining how you can tell the above statement is true. So, the statement we were proving to be true was the author repeats the phrase bravest of all to emphasize how the students build on each other's ideas as they plan their presentation. And we had to have two details from the text to support our answer. So, here's my paragraph. I said, in to honor, Janet Taylor repeats bravest of all to emphasize how the students build on each other's ideas as they plan their presentation. Alicia introduces the phrase in a Civil War poem about a woman who is the bravest of all in her town. Jerome picks up the phrase, repeating it as he thinks aloud. Tia then hears the phrase and it helps her focus on an approach for their presentation about poems, their presentation for poems about bravery. Therefore, the repetition of bravest of all shows how one idea can lead to other ideas. So, you see how I broke this down using the hint? So, whenever we were coming up with how the students interacted with the phrase bravest of all, we said Alicia suggested it because she read the phrase in the poem about the woman who lived during the Civil War and she was the bravest of all in her town. And then Jerome, who kind of already had a bad attitude about poetry, kind of picks up the phrase and he starts repeating it and thinking about it. And then Tia picks up on Jerome's ideas and suggests that they should make their presentation about poems. So, all I did was take what was in my hint, that brainstorm I did, and turn it into ideas. And those I used as my specific details from the text because anytime you're talking about what happens in the text, yes, you can put quotations around it if it's like a direct quote. But just talking about the ideas can be a detail from the passage that supports your response as well. So, if you would like, you can copy down my paragraph as well in your workbook or on a scratch sheet of paper. That way, you have your response to look at as well as this one because it's good to have two examples to look back on whenever you are comparing your writing. All right, guys. So we are going to wrap up part 4. Don't forget your quiz on this will be tomorrow. You will be doing part 5. So if you would like to go ahead and look at part 5 in your workbook, you can already have an idea on what it's going to be about. So if you have any questions about anything we did today, make sure that you let me know. Always more than willing to help you out. All right, guys. If you don't have anything else